little helpers. Today we have a lovely episode because we are going to be talking about falling in love. I'm in love. Kibby, are you in love still? Oh, yes.
Still. It's good to check, you know?
It is good to check. Especially since some of the research says that love really can decline in marriage. So just wanted to check in with you and see if things are still going well.
I appreciate
so
that.
I'm in love. Kibby's in love. Many of you are in love. So what does the research say about this? I was kind of skeptical at first when I was typing this in because I'm like, God, what a big topic. Like, what am I possibly going to see about falling in love that we're going to be able to condense in an episode? But we found some cool research.
Yeah, we've talked a lot before about love and attachment and relationships. So, I was thinking about it, and it seems like we really discussed a lot of like what is it like when people are connected? You know, why is it healthy? Why is it unhealthy? How to change it? But the experience of falling in love is really particular, and it's actually been cool to watch you go through that recently. You know, like sometimes you'll text me about something that's going on with you and your partner, and you could just it's kind of nice to just see a friend fall in love. And I've had that experience like pretty recently too, not only with my husband but also with my baby. So this is like the experience of like going from no love to love, right? And also I just always laugh on The Bachelor when they say, you know, like I could see myself falling in love, or I am falling in love, and then like a week later they're like, I am in love.
Yes,
so it's like
I know.
This is just an interesting state of like that people might be aware of. That's like going from the process of like I'm just getting to know this person to the being in love, right?
I know, that always cracks me up on The Bachelor too. It's like it's this weird stepwise script that we have to go through. Like, we can't just say.
Do they tell you about this? That's always
no.
my curiosity.
I don't know how it happens because I
say you're falling. You're approximating the falling in love process.
Yeah. I mean, it becomes clear that you have to announce some sort of feelings for him. So, like, I said I was infatuated with him, which to me just meant like, yeah, I have a crush on you, which is true. But no, they never were like, okay, so it's time for the falling in love speech. And then next week we'll reevaluate and see if you're in love.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point too. It's interesting that you said, in fact, I'm infatuated, because I wondered as we were thinking about falling in love, is that what it is? Is like the infatuation stage falling in love, and then when you're actually in love, it's a completely different thing? Or is infatuation something different than falling in love, right? Like, how nuanced can we get with all these different states of like loveness?
Did you find an answer?
Yeah. I found one answer, and we're going to talk about it more. Okay.
I want to see if I lied to Ari.
Yeah. So, so I don't think actually like the infatuation itself is falling in love. And that's really important because I think when people feel that infatuation stage, they automatically assume, oh my God, I'm falling in love with this person, right? But actually infatuation might be something completely different that doesn't actually progress or isn't a sign of something good, right? Or a sign of that you're going to get into a relationship, like you're not promised something, right? So one theory I did look up was there's Sternberg's triangular theory of love, which is really simple but nice. It says that love has three components: intimacy, passion, and commitment, right? We kind of assume all those go together, right? Like, oh, we just have the best sex with this person. We are really intimate. We share things. That must mean that person is going to commit to me, right? I've fallen for that many, many times. But no, it's a separate component. And so falling in love is kind of like the merging of all of those three things. But there are different types of romantic love when you have just like one or a couple of them. So if you just have intimacy alone, you have liking. If you have passion alone, that's infatuation.
Oh.
If you have just commitment alone, that's empty love. That's which is sad. And short-term and romantic love or friends with benefits relationships are intimacy plus passion. And romantic love in a long-term relationship has all three of them, right? Ideally, intimacy, passion, and commitment, right? So falling in love could be going into those different states, right? Going from like, oh, I don't know this person to like into one of those. But just because you're infatuated or just because you've made a commitment doesn't necessarily mean you have the other parts of the love. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I feel like all of my 20s were passion and intimacy.
Tell us more.
So there's something called the self-expansion model of love, which I find super interesting because I had never explicitly thought about love in this way before. And it's basically that when you fall in love, what can really enhance your feeling of falling in love and keep it there is this sense that you are incorporating the other into yourself and thereby expanding yourself. So I have my certain traits. Jason, my partner, has his. When we come together, there's this incorporation of his traits into mine. And people who are in love and committed tend to use more words like we and ours versus I, me, mine. And there's also been research, not necessarily proof, but like evidence of this. So people with greater relationship satisfaction also tend to score higher on measures of self-expansion. So basically just making the self wider, more complex, just incorporating more into it. And I think I was thinking about how this relates because the paper was talking a lot about how you can increase your love by doing expanding activities, which is what The Bachelor is all about, right? The Bachelor puts you in challenging situations that are high intensity, novel, and that allows you and The Bachelor to expand both of yourselves, but you do it together, and so it feels like it's a product of the two of you. So if you go skydiving together, it's like, wow, I didn't know I was the kind of person who could go skydiving. Now I am because I'm with this person. Really, it's because you're with ABC, but you know, that's how it's kind of incorporated. I didn't know I was the kind of person who could date one man who's also dating 20 other women. I didn't know that I could be the person who would eat the weird, exotic, strange Asian food. They always have those episodes, you know, where they're like, ew, Asia's so weird and gross.
So it's like, it's I don't know, I would say tricking, but it's making you more open-minded than you are, or is it just like incorporating new experiences into your memories or identity?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I was a little bit unclear on this, but it seems like with the whole novelty thing, yeah, I mean, it is expanding maybe what you thought was possible about yourself or the experiences you've had, just somehow expanding the self. And the more kind of overlap you have with your partner, so basically the more you incorporate his or her qualities, the more you feel the self has expanded and the happier you are. And I was thinking about this with my relationship because Jason is by far the least, I guess, out there partner I've had, strictly because he's super responsible, right? Like he doesn't get to travel. He doesn't get to do crazy shit all the time. And yet he's been the deepest love relationship I've had. And so I was like, what? Okay, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, is there much self-expansion? And what I realized is that in my 20s, I was very interested in expanding myself in a certain way. I wanted to be more adventurous, more interesting. I wanted to have just more and more experience. I was like gobbling it up. And so I think I went for men who could give me that. They were wealthy. They were adventurous. They'd been everywhere. They could take me to the best restaurants. They could do all this. And so I was listening to a podcast a while ago that was talking about how the best, the most successful relationships or the most successful partners are actually not very high in adventurousness. They're more moderate to low. And the reason is because if you're super high in adventurousness, like I was in my 20s, you're not going to want to stick around with the same partner. Like you're going to be wanting to bounce around and do a bunch of shit. But I think with Jason, what I realized is he provides me an opportunity to expand myself in ways that are more valuable to me today. and were less valuable to me before. So Jason to me feels like a very good-hearted, compassionate, selfless, responsible person. Those were not attributes I was interested in my 20s.
Right.
Now I am, because I want babies.
Yeah.
And so there is much more of a self-expansion being with him than with my old typical kind of partner.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that the person it's almost kind of like an exercise in narcissism, like what the partners we tend to choose to fall in love with will have qualities that we feel like are missing in ourselves, right? And it does get reinforced by, society or, or the way people react to us when we fall in love with someone. If we have a relationship with someone who's, quote, impressive in the ways that we want, right? It's like someone who's super beautiful or handsome, who's really successful, or whatever attributes that are kind of valued. Like, family members are like, oh yeah, you got a good one. I'm so proud of you for dating this person. It's like that person's benefits or qualities and their benefits get like absorbed by the person, and it's like, good job, you accomplished love. So yeah, and that could be really intoxicating in some ways, because if you feel really insecure, feel like you want to develop a part of yourself, that's a shortcut, right? Just to like fall in love with someone who has them.
I mean, I remember a feeling of, once I find my partner, I will be elevated into this next stage, experience, plateau of life. Like, I'm just gonna, and I guess that makes sense when I think about incorporating all of this new stuff into myself, and that does feel like a significant step up in life, to all of a sudden have so much more access to things. What you said about incorporating things that you don't have, like the differences. So this idea of opposites attract. So the research on this is pretty interesting, because a lot of times opposites don't attract because they just don't have enough to keep them together. They might not like each other enough. But what one study showed was that if you gave research participants profiles of fake people with attributes that were either similar or dissimilar to them, so same or opposite, but then you told them, this person is very likely to like you back, then the research participants would choose the dissimilar profile. So,
ooh, cool. Interesting.
So one of the parts that's really important for love is reciprocity. So people tend to fall in love with people who like them back. So if that's established, then opposites attract. If that's not established, opposites might not attract.
This makes me want to work so badly for a dating app company doing the research. Can you imagine all of the cool studies you can do with what actually like gets a really defined swipe left or right? I don't even know. I've never been on an app before. I've never app dated. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, that's sorry. A tangent.
That is crazy.
But that is interesting. So it's like if you know that if the more similar you are, the more likely that person's going to like you, right? We know similarity breeds attraction. So like similar backgrounds, similar even like looks and values and things like that. But if a person is very, very different, but you know that person's going to like you, that's going to be attractive.
Yeah. That's going to be preferable. Because it provides more of an opportunity for self-expansion.
Right. I mean, that just makes sense. I mean, diversity in general just leads to more resources, right? Like you have two people with diversity in qualities and resources. Like I think that's another part of this expansion model, that it's not only qualities, like is that person adventurous or fun, but what network does that person have? What like literal resources do they have? Like you actually start to combine those two. And so the more variety you have, the, wider breadth of resources and qualities you have as a unit.
Yeah, exactly. And there is kind of this element of selfishness, like, oh, I want to be with you so that I can expand. Yeah. But it also incentivizes you to support your partner in their self-expansion, because the more they expand, the more you expand. And so it's kind of got this selfish origin, but you wind up being more supportive.
So if that's the case, and that's like the ideal, right? What about relationships where you fall in love with someone where they try to limit
Yeah,
you?
I know, right? Yeah. I was thinking about that too. I mean, the research I was reading didn't really address that. But I thought you had some interesting thoughts about narcissism. Yeah.
The funny thing is that I remember we had an episode on falling in love with a narcissist way back in the day, right? Mm-hmm. Way back, in season 1. And we said that narcissists have a really hard time being in a committed relationship because they love that initial infatuation phase, right? That initial like passion, and those flood of emotions in the beginning, and then they get bored with the day-to-day relationship, right? And that's when they kind of bounce and go to the next one. But if we think about it with the self-expansion model, where actually a relationship gives you a chance to realize and explore ideal parts of yourself with that other person, right? You're your best self when you're falling in love, right? You put your best foot forward. Mm-hmm. You have someone else who you, admire or like in some way, like you back. So this there's a positive feedback on the parts of you that you are bringing out. So I'm sure when in your 20s, when you're falling in love, you're probably the most adventurous, right? You're up to do anything. You do cool things. That other person likes you because of it. And so not only is it that you're falling in love because you're trying to get their qualities, but they're reflecting the good parts of you, your ideal self.
Yeah.
Over time, then you start to fart in front of each other. You have bedhead. You never fart. Only ideal selves. Right? You wear your ugly bedtime shirt in front of them, right? You start to show the other parts of yourself that's not the ideal self. And I was thinking that it's not just the narcissist who doesn't like the boringness of a relationship, but they might not like the boringness of themselves, right? Mm-hmm. They start to show the parts of themselves that are less ideal, less sparkly, and they might just get so afraid that someone's going to see the more mundane, uglier sides of them that's when they might bounce from a relationship. So,
yeah.
And I was just thinking about that, about people who tend to be so into the phase of falling in love. They just are constantly jumping from ideal self to ideal self.
Yeah, I mean, self-expansion might be a pretty threatening concept to some people who are barely keeping control of their own identity, or who are barely keeping control of liking their own identity.
Yeah.
It can be very scary to push those boundaries, allow more in when what you have is so rickety. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that this research was missing was, for whom is self-expansion not ideal? And it was talking about how the happiest couples are those that were self-expansive. But what about those who weren't? What was going on there? I don't entirely know. I mean, for some, it's probably just that either they're too similar or they're not interested in expanding in the way that the other person has to offer them. Mm-hmm. I mean, in my last relationship, I definitely felt at a certain point that I was not expanding, that I was being limited. Yeah.
What did that feel like? What do you think
it felt like
there?
Entrapment and punishment for being who I am, and I love self-expansion. What I mean? I think I fell in love with New York because New York was an opportunity for self-expansion. That was what it gave me. Yeah. And I think for a while I was interested in the self-expansion of, okay, I can be someone in a relationship. I can be calmer. I can be committed. That's all self-expanding. And then once I had kind of achieved that to a certain degree, it was like, okay, but the rest of me is atrophying. Mm-hmm. And now in my relationship, I feel very accepted for who I am. And so it doesn't feel like that has to atrophy for any reason that has to do with him.
Mm-hmm. So how can you explain that from the other person's perspective? If that person falls in love with you, right? Yeah. And many people probably have experienced that either in themselves or someone else. If that person falls in love with you, and that falling in love is supposed to be an expansive process, but actually that person tends to be like either controlling or, you know, just wants to limit you.
Yeah.
And not want you to expand like the different parts of you or branch out. What's going on there? Do we know?
But I feel like there's an interaction. I don't know from the research, but I feel like there's an interaction there with trust. If you don't trust that the person will stay, then A, you lose your opportunity for self-expansion, but B, you're just more concentrated on safety than you are on expansion. That would be my hypothesis.
Yeah, so I wonder if for individuals who feel like self-expansion is a scarce resource, either because they have experienced abandonment themselves, and so feeling like a unit and expansive with other people is kind of something that's scary and not given, or when they have it, they just are they're so terrified of losing it that they'd rather limit it for the short term, right? In order to get at least a little bit of expansiveness.
Yeah.
That's sad. That's sad. That's like that backfires.
It does backfire.
I also imagine too that we know that it doesn't. We always say that we always hear, you know, you got to love yourself before you love others, right? You got to be a whole person before you can give yourself to other people, right? So those kind of like common sayings seem to go against what we're talking about, where it's like fall in love, become more than who you are, right? But it makes sense that if you feel like you're really missing something in you, right? If something is really out of your capabilities to develop in yourself, right? Like, let's say I'm not adventurous at all. I'm so insecure about it. I've never been that way. But if I date an adventurous partner, then people will start to see me as someone adventurous, right? But that doesn't work fully, I bet. I wonder if there's like actually limits to the self-expansion model, because even if you're dating someone who is opposite and has all the qualities you want, you are never going to actually get that yourself. They might push you to become more of that, and people would see you as an adventurous couple. But it's not like they could fundamentally change who you are. Yeah. And so people who might have those expectations of, if I date this person, then I'll become XYZ, they're going to be disappointed on some level, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that has been seen to backfire or to limit love is being over-idealized. So if someone's dating me because I'm adventurous and they want to incorporate my adventurousness into them and they over-idealize me, then I'm going to feel like, hey, they have unrealistic expectations. I can't possibly meet them. I'm not seen for who I am, but for a random quality. And so, yeah, there does seem to have to be a realistic approach to this. I can expand to a degree, but I can't be you.
Yeah, I do feel like that has been something that people have felt when dating me. I mean, there has been this experience where I feel like a little bit idealized when some people have dated me. Like I could just see, I've had these experiences where I see these men fall in love with me, and I feel like it's not even me that they're falling in love with, right? And I don't think I'm not the kind of person who fakes or I'm totally different when falling in love. I'm pretty genuine to myself, but sometimes people put me on this pedestal. And usually those people have been people who are like lost in their life or, you know, have a lot of great qualities, but are just kind of figuring out. And then I feel like I've called it pedestaling me, where they really get excited about me and almost like feel like they've arrived at something that they've been looking for. To the point where I kind of don't feel seen at all. Like it was like, oh, fine, I'm dating you. I get all these things. And I think there's certain qualities about me that I might have projected, like that I'm self-sufficient or, you know, driven or whatever. And these people kind of want that. But then when they enter into the relationship, then I'm like, you know, there's that imbalance of, then I feel like the caregiver and the other person feels like they're still lost in a way. They're still, you know, not self-sufficient, and they're constantly trying to, you know, they're kind of upset that they haven't become someone different. I feel like that's interesting. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? With my
I
exes.
do know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I've had that a number of times, and I didn't know, and this might sound like I'm bragging, but it's really not. It's like, I feel like these people have dated me and gotten really excited about me for a promise of what that means for them and their growth. And when we get into the relationship, I'm like, no, I need support sometimes, or I can't, make your dreams come true all the time, but I still feel the pressure to try to do so. And so it's just a constant disappointment cycle for them and me.
Yeah, I was reading this paper and thinking about where envy plays in. Mm-hmm. Because theoretically, if what you want is expansion, and then that makes you want your partner to expand, then why would you be envious of your partner?
Right.
And it is kind of an interesting theory that, like, once you realize that you can't incorporate them fully, that's when envy can show up and be like, oh, I can't access this anymore. Well, now I don't want you to have it either, because it's just a constant reflection of my own lack. Like,
right.
Or deficit, rather.
Yeah.
One thing I've experienced is, like, I have had a sexual past, shockingly. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have, but
No,
I have. Never. You've never had sex with anyone? Oh, wow.
No, just got married and had a baby.
How'd your baby come, Stork?
Yeah, immaculate conception. Yeah.
It's interesting because sexual prowess is so important to men, and I've heard this over and over again, that when a woman has more sexual experience than a man, or not even more, but just enough for her not to be inexperienced, then that can be seen as extremely threatening to men. Mm-hmm. And to some women. But that's an interesting one, right? It's like, that's the thing I'm not supposed to get from my partner, is their sexual experience. It's like that's somehow, an axiom for men. And I don't know if that's because I don't know. It's like there's just this ingrained cultural thing that they're not supposed to get that expansion from their main partner. Mm-hmm. And that's just a threatening thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see. So that you feel like that your sexual past, or like your sexual history, was something like a thing of envy in your relationship.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or at least a threat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah. It seems like we've already kind of walked into this part of the conversation, but like talking about the dark side of falling in love, right? And kind of figuring out because falling in love feels so dangerous, right? Like there's something really destabilizing about it. It's consuming. It makes you act in different ways. Some people love that, and some people kind of get really afraid of that.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're always talking about mental health and thinking about mental health. And I think what's on our minds is like, okay, falling in love is great. We expand. We're a unit. We have diverse resources and qualities, and we share them, and grow as a combined force. But then we also know that there's a dark side where if that whole process does not happen, right? It's something that's threatening. You feel like you're going to expand, but maybe your expectations of it are a little bit too high or unreasonable, and
I'm just realizing something, which was in this paper. It was talking about how doing expansive activities together, so right, again, exciting, novel, challenging, whatever, will increase your love for each other, but you shouldn't do activities that are too challenging for you to actually meet them. And so I wonder if sometimes what happens is that your partner has a quality that is too challenging. Like when you were dating these deadbeat dudes, they had no job, and you were getting a PhD and starting a gym. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It was, the gap was so wide that maybe it was just, should I revise?
No. It's just, no. You're just telling the truth. Yeah. I was trying to be gentle about it, but yeah.
The gap was so wide that imagining actually getting there, or maybe imagining it was possible, but then when they had to actually attempt it, they realized this is too big of a mountain for me to climb, and then it was just a source of envy and feeling bad about themselves. Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so there's like when you talk about that diversity aspect, diversity can be great, but if it's like too far, then it could just seem like there's this chasm between the two people that can't be bridged. I actually was, I was trying to look for research on the dark sides of falling in love, or when it's actually a problem. It's what clinical psychologists often think about. When is it going to be unhealthy? And I was actually surprised to find that the research on neuroscience on love supports that it is kind of like a dangerous thing. The neurochemical profile of people who are in love is characterized by like low levels of satiation serotonin. So actually, I thought we would be flooded with all the good, neurotransmitters and hormones and everything. But when we fall in love, but that's actually not what the research says. We actually have like a deficit. We have low levels of serotonin compared to other people. In fact, it actually matches the neuropsychological profile of people who have OCD.
That's wild.
So your brain is like, like starved for the good stuff. And then, of course, it gets that boost of dopamine when you're with that person.
Mm-hmm. Why OCD instead of addiction?
That's what I was wondering too. Like that's what I felt, because I don't know if it has the same serotonin profile. I know that you get a boost of dopamine when you're around that person, which probably does have addictive qualities. Yeah. But it's at least like, I don't know, this gets into the weeds of it. The density of the platelet binding sites are the same as people who have OCD but are unmedicated. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely think also, with the dopamine rush, I always wondered if people who have addictive qualities tend to like falling in love, right? Or who have ADHD like falling in love, because you get that adrenaline and a little bit of anxiety too, arousal and dopamine. You're like looking excited at these.
Well, we both have ADHD, so do you love falling in love? Because I know I love falling in love. It was my hobby.
I don't think I do. I mean, yeah, of course I do. But I don't think people are going to laugh at me because I'm a serial monogamist. So let's just say yes. Like, I was just thinking about how, it as like this period of uncertainty and kind of anxiety. I'm thinking no, but I must, considering how much I got into relationships.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, one paper I read said that so basically they like tracked college students for 10 weeks, and they would give them a survey every 2 weeks about self-esteem, and I asked if they'd fallen in love in the past 2 weeks. The ones who did reported higher self-esteem, which is interesting because I feel like when I have fallen in love in the past, it has destroyed my self-esteem, but maybe that's only after the rejection part. I don't know. It's just hard to have super high self-esteem when you're like hanging on the words of somebody else. You're like, when are they going to text me? When are they going to text me? That doesn't feel like a super confident perch.
Actually, I wonder if the research we're talking about has something to do with you're falling in love and the other person is also falling in love with you, versus if you're falling in love with that person, it's like you don't know how they feel about you, right?
Right.
Because I know the research that you're talking about. It's kind of cool where people who are falling in love actually identify like positive words with themselves more often. And they also have like better self-efficacy. Like they feel like they could do more stuff, and they have better self-esteem. So that's like in support of the self-expansion model. But I don't know. Maybe if it's like the other person's uncertain, it breeds like that infatuation, right? It's like you're just passionate about something that's like out of your reach, but that doesn't mean you're like falling in love. That might just mean that you have an unrequited crush.
Right. Or you're being fucked around with and you don't know what the deal is yet.
Yeah. Then you have this like boost of dopamine, right? You have this like feeling of anxiety that comes with falling in love, but then you have like this really intense dopamine when they like come and actually text you back, and then it drops back down. So it might just be more of a roller coaster than, I
mean, it's funny when you said that. I was like, well, so I see Jason on the weekends only because he has a crazy work schedule. So I'll see him on Friday, and my mood on Friday nights becomes very high, and my mood remains very elevated until Monday morning. And I have a big drop.
Oh, that's why. You've been saying that you've been kind of down like on Sundays or Mondays and
I know
about work, but maybe that's why. You have this lovey phase, and then
Yeah, I know.
How does falling in love now with someone in your, like, in this stage of your life, like 30s, feel different than in your 20s?
It's so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that, again, when I was in my 20s, my objectives were very different. I wanted really exciting men. And I came up with this metaphor for my last relationship. Well, not for my last relationship, my entire dating history. Of, you know how when you get a new pair of shoes and they're really pretty and you put them on and you walk around the block and you're like, oh my God, I have so many blisters. Mm-hmm. Maybe you don't do this because you never wear heels.
That's exactly why I don't wear any heels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I feel like my 20s was a succession of more and more heels because I'd get the blisters. I'd be like, ouch, take those shoes off and put on a new pair of heels. Mm-hmm. Get those blisters, take those off. And when I was in my last relationship, I was like, I'm sick of taking these shoes off and buying more shoes. It's exhausting. Mm-hmm. It's not getting me to where I'm going. I'm just starting and stopping over and over again. So I'm going to wear these shoes until I get calloused. Mm-hmm. And so I got so many blisters in that last relationship, right? I mean, my feet were torn up.
Yeah, you were calloused.
I was calloused. And then when I dated Jason, it was like putting on a pair of shoes and I was ready. I had calluses.
Just putting on tennis shoes and you're like, oh wait, why aren't I wearing this all this time?
No. Well, maybe a little bit of that. Maybe like comfortable heels. Like ones that were not likely to give me a shitload of blisters, like my last shoes. That were like designed to hurt your feet, you know, specifically. But I'd also built up the ability to stay and to work through the discomfort. And so yeah, I mean, I just think that in my 20s, because I didn't have a good enough reason to keep the shoes on, like to stay in relationships once they hurt or once they weren't interesting to me anymore, I would just take them off and move forward. And like, I also had a compelling reason not to invest in a relationship, which was that I did not know where my career was going to take me. Mm-hmm. So I just think that I wasn't motivated at that time to seek a partner with genuinely, with qualities that were conducive for a genuinely long-term committed relationship. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I also think that I was more interested in expanding pieces of me that were also not necessarily conducive to a long-term relationship, but were conducive for me developing interest in myself, developing confidence in myself, and kind of getting a lot of stuff out of my system before I would need to switch into a new developmental period of like settling down. Yeah,
makes sense. Yeah, I'm trying to think if the feeling, I know what you're talking about because I kind of feel the same in my trajectory, but I'm trying to think of the feeling of falling in love was qualitatively different back then versus now. And I have a weird example because my husband now is someone that I've known for 18 years. And if we're thinking about the triangular theory of love, we definitely had intimacy. We definitely had commitment, right? Yeah. Like we both, I mean, even before we got together, he flew out from California to New York to be with me when I was going through some hard times. He took me to a surgery, you know, like he always was committed to me, not like as a girlfriend, but showed like the willingness to be there over the course of our life. And we were intimate in the sense that we shared really vulnerable parts of ourselves together, but we didn't have the passion. We were never romantic before we like got together. So I think it felt different in the sense that the passion came. Like the passion like just started slowly like dawning on us and then kind of like hit us. So we had a crush on someone that we knew was always going to be there. There was like no uncertainty in whether that person would actually like be a good partner and care for us. We were uncertain that it would ruin the friendship, right? Yes. Like if it didn't work out, we were terrified that we'd lose like a really important person in our lives. So I remember it still was it still had this level of anxiety. It's still like we both were like, we're freaking out when we first hooked up. But it did have this, once we knew that we could settle and the passion was there and we could settle into it, then it was like we had been married for years, which was destabilizing on its own. So I'm trying to think about like if it felt different to fall in love in my 30s. And I think the only difference is that I really prioritized relationships that had the commitment component. I did not want to date online. I didn't want to like screw around after my divorce, especially because I was like, I know I want a family and I know that that's going to be really hard. I need to find someone who will be there. Right. And, you know, Alex definitely checked that box. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if it felt different. I think before I was just more like, you know, this was just some kind of like looking for, I don't know, validation or like the excitement of someone looking at me and falling in love or being idealized, right? Like I think all those dopamine hits were more exciting in my 20s. And now I'm just like, no, that's going to lead to nothing. Like it feels like useless. Yeah.
Well, right. I had to learn a lot of lessons in my 20s about what exciting men mean. It means they constantly chase excitement. And I, you know, especially in my first like major-ish relationship with this guy, Eric. I think that's the first time I've said his name. His name's Eric. He was so exciting. And that was a bad bummer of a relationship. But I got a lot out of it. I got so much expansion out of it. Sexual expansion, for sure. New York expansion, like seeing all of the city, getting the best food, going to the best parties, going to parties with Victoria's Secret models, like all of that was so enticing and important to me when I was 21 through 24. And I remember feeling like I'm never going to be able to provide for myself what he provided for me. And then I did. And so that was like a great lesson to learn. And now, you know, I don't think that I would have been interested in Jason in my 20s. I would have been attracted to him, but I would just be like, well, this isn't where I need to grow right now. This isn't what I'm looking for. And now it's so attractive to meet a man who's so selfless and responsible and reliable. And all of that would have bored me before. But now I'm just like, all of that is so sexy because he feels like an adult male, and that feels like an endangered species. Yeah,
definitely. And something that you want for yourself because you're getting ready to like do the like next stages of your career. You're looking to start a family. Like all of that stuff takes like all the qualities that you described, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how many man children I dated.
Yeah. It's amazing how many are out there.
I know.
It does. On man children, by the way. So send in your questions.
Well, there's more of them than ever before, too. There are more man children walking the plains. What I noticed in my last relationship was that I stopped being able to be attracted to other men. And I took that as the major sign that I was in the right relationship. Now, in my current relationship, I'm noticing that I am somewhat attracted to other men, but I don't want them. And that's very different. I think in my last relationship, I was too afraid to be attracted to other people. And now I don't have that fear at all because it's just not threatening. And that has been so relaxing. I feel so free in this relationship. Like, I don't think about it all the time. And that's really great. I don't want to have to think about my relationship constantly the way I did in my last one or in all the ones before that.
Yeah.
Now I just have waves of like, oh, I wish I were at Jason. Oh, I miss Jason. Oh, like, I can't wait to see him. That's very different than like, what's he doing? What is he thinking? What does he feel about me? What should I text him? Oh my God, am I in the right relationship? I'm in the wrong relationship. I don't like this particular feature of his. Does that mean that I don't love him? Like all of that was such a feature in the past.
Yeah. I mean, this is, you know, we're kind of walking into tips right now, but it seems like there is a normal level of like anxiety and, you know, brain chemical disruption in the process of falling in love, right? You're making a new relationship. You're changing, ideally, parts of yourself. You're changing your life. So, of course, it's going to be scary, but if you feel like, I think the idea of is if it was working well, you expand on each other in a really nice and healthy way. If you feel like that's not the case, right? You feel like you have to close yourself down, or you feel like you are obsessing over it, or you're becoming a person that you don't want, you know, in whatever direction, then that's a time to be like, like, what's going on? Maybe this falling in love phase is like, you know, not as healthy as it could be. Yeah. And also it's interesting to think about if you know, if the love is not going to work, right? If you're falling in love with the wrong guys or the wrong women or whatever, you could kind of think about like, okay, am I going after a quality that I want in myself? Am I just kind of chasing an ideal version of me? And what is that, right? Because that could actually, you know, be kind of turned into a goal, right? If it's like, oh, I keep dating adventurous men or women, then maybe you want to be more adventurous, and maybe there's ways to work on that in yourself, so you feel like you could expand on it with a partner, but you don't have to just feel like there's a void that person is going to fill.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's like, okay, yes, self-expansion is good, and we know that the best relationships involve a lot of self-expansion, but does that mean expanding in only one direction, like on only one quality, or does it mean expanding on as many qualities as possible? Or does it mean expanding on just, you know, valued qualities? So...
And do you, when you fall in love, are you supportive of their expansion and vice versa? Or is it like, does it feel like a competition, or does it feel like you are scared of their expansion because it's threatening with something else? If that's the case, then, I don't know, get some therapy around that, because that feeling of falling in love can be intoxicating, but it might lead you to hurting yourself or that other person, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's this is a great reconceptualization. And I think we were walking into a cliche of like, are you a better person when you're with them, or do they help you grow? But literally think about your own growth trajectory with this person. Is that something that you like, or do you feel like you're a bonsai tree?
I like that.
How did you and Alex say I love you for the first time?
I'm gonna keep this PC, but it was one of the early times we were having sex, and I said,
"Good job keeping it PC."
It was after, and I feel like it was so early on into our relationship, but we had known each other for so long, and I said it in that moment to surprise him, because I knew that he was probably nervous to say it that early, because it was probably like our fourth night together. So I just said, this is so embarrassing. This might be obvious, but I fucking love you. And he still remembers that day. Like, holds that as like a memory.
Did he? And he said it. He said it back then.
Yeah.
Was he like, I fucking love you too, kitty?
I don't even remember. No, he just laughed and said, I love you too. How did you guys say I love you?
So Jason had been doing this thing where he'd look at me and he'd say, I like you. And then I kind of was getting the feeling that maybe he was wanting to say something more, but it was also really early on in our relationship. And so at a certain point, he did do the Bachelor thing of saying, it's like, I don't know, I kind of feel like I'm maybe falling. But he didn't want to say the L word. So then later, I was making him do the 36 questions that lead to love. And we got to the question that was like, what's your perfect day? And I was like, I think I'd be in a boat, you know, around, like, boating around some mangrove trees and, like, looking at the animals. And then, you know, like, the person I was dating would man up and tell me how he really feels. And and so he laughed and said, I love you.
Aww.
Oh, yeah.
That's cute.
So, okay, so... Little helpers, if you are in love with us and want to see us expand, if you could give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, leave us a little comment just to let us know how you really feel. That would be greatly appreciated, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.